What would you do if your HOA president stole your packages? I never thought I'd fight back with a skunk. My name's Michael, and Karen Wilkins, Oakwood's clipboard-wielding dictator, made my life hell from the day I arrived. Fines for grass a quarter-inch too tall. Notices for wreaths that had excessive red in a non-holiday month. She even spied through my windows, citing me for the wrong color curtains. But none of that compared to the day she started stealing my mail. That was when I decided enough was enough, and planned a stinky revenge that changed everything. I never thought I'd become the neighborhood vigilante, but when you're pushed to your limits by an HOA president with a power complex, desperate times call for desperate measures. My name is Michael, and I moved into Oakwood Estates 8 months ago. It's a beautiful subdivision with manicured lawns, tasteful homes, and unfortunately, the most overbearing homeowners association president in the history of suburban America, Karen Wilkins. I first met her during my move-in. I had barely finished parking the moving truck when she marched across the street, clipboard in hand, wearing her trademark khaki capris and blue blazer with an oversized HOA president pin. Hello there, I'm Karen Wilkins, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. I see you're moving in today, which is fine, but you should know moving trucks are only permitted between 9 a.m. and 5:00 p.m., and yours is partially blocking the sidewalk by exactly 7 inches, which violates Section 12-4 of our community bylaws. I smiled politely and moved the truck, hoping this would be our last awkward encounter. I was wrong. Over the next few months, I received official violation notices for grass that was a quarter-inch too tall, a garden hose visible from the street for more than 12 hours, a bird feeder that attracted non-approved species of birds, and my personal favorite, a wreath on my front door that contained excessive amounts of the color red during a non-holiday month. Each notice came with a potential fine and was signed with Karen's flourishing signature and a smiley face sticker that somehow made the whole thing more infuriating. I complied with each ridiculous demand while maintaining my composure. I'm a software developer who works from home, and the last thing I wanted was neighborhood drama. But Karen wasn't satisfied with merely policing the exterior of my home. Little did I realize her obsession would soon escalate from lawn policing to blatant theft, and I was about to discover just how far she'd go. She began organizing community walkthroughs, where she and her loyal committee members would peer through windows to ensure that visible interior decor also met the community aesthetic standards. I caught her one afternoon with her face pressed against my living room window, her hands cupped around her eyes to reduce the glare. "Can I help you with something, Karen?" I asked after quietly opening my front door. She jumped back, nearly trampling her prized hydrangeas. "Oh, Michael, the committee and I were just conducting our quarterly interior compliance review. Your curtains appear to be navy blue, which is concerning because Section 17-5 clearly states that all window treatments visible from the street must be in neutral or earth-toned colors. Actually, they're black," I corrected her. "I don't recall anything in the bylaws about interior design approval." Karen's smile tightened. "Well, perhaps you haven't received the updated bylaws. I'll have a copy delivered to you immediately. In the meantime, I'll just make a note that you'll need to replace those curtains within 14 days. The updated bylaws that arrived in my mailbox the next day appeared to be printed on Karen's home printer, with several suspiciously handwritten additions that all seemed to grant the HOA president unprecedented powers over everything from interior paint colors to the types of beverages residents could visibly consume on their front porches. Then the package situation began. Like many people who work remotely, I order a lot online: computer parts, office supplies, books, you name it. I started noticing that packages were being delivered according to tracking information, but they weren't on my porch when I checked. The first time it happened, I assumed it was a mistake or perhaps a porch pirate. I installed a doorbell camera, and what I discovered made my blood boil. Karen, in all her HOA glory, was collecting my packages, examining them on my porch, and then taking some of them away. She would arrive shortly after deliveries, inspect the boxes, and if they were a certain size or from specific retailers, she would take them to her house across the street. She seemed particularly interested in anything from tech companies or bookstores. One afternoon, she opened a small package right on my porch, peeked inside, and then slipped its contents into her blazer pocket before discarding the packaging in my recycling bin. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I confronted her politely the next day. "Excuse me, Karen. I noticed on my security camera that you've been taking packages from my porch. Is there something I should know about?" Karen's face flushed briefly before she regained her composure. "Oh, Michael, I'm just doing my job as HOA president. Section 23-9 clearly states that all deliveries must comply with neighborhood aesthetic standards. I've been temporarily confiscating packages that don't meet our guidelines for packages." "I wasn't aware of any package guidelines," I said, knowing full well this was complete nonsense. "Yes," she replied with disturbing confidence. "We have restrictions on box sizes, delivery frequencies, and visible logos that might disrupt the visual harmony of our community. I've been meaning to return them, but I've been so busy with HOA matters." I maintained my calm. "Karen, I'd appreciate it if you returned all my packages immediately and refrained from taking any more in the future." Karen smiled. "Once you fill out a package exemption form and get it approved by the board, I'd be happy to do that. The next meeting is in 3 weeks." "And where exactly would I find this form?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm still drafting it," she admitted without a hint of irony. "The package aesthetic guidelines are quite new, you see, but rules are rules, Michael, even when they're still being formalized." I called the local police non-emergency line that evening. The officer who responded was sympathetic but explained that since Karen lived in the neighborhood and claimed she was acting in an official capacity, it was more of a civil matter than theft, at least for now. He recommended documenting everything and consulting with a lawyer. Officer Reynolds scratched his head after watching my doorbell footage. "Look, between you and me, I've dealt with this kind of HOA situation before. It's a gray area legally, because she's claiming to act under some kind of authority, even though it sounds like she's making up rules as she goes. Document everything, get a copy of the real bylaws, and maybe talk to some neighbors. I bet good money you're not the only one dealing." He was right. When I began discreetly asking around, I discovered an entire neighborhood living in fear of Karen's arbitrary enforcement. The elderly couple on the corner had been fined for having grandchildren visit more than the permitted 3 times per month. The single mom down the street had received violations for leaving work before acceptable morning departure hours. Each infraction seemed designed to extract fees, exert control, or simply make Karen feel important. My packages were eventually returned 3 days later, coincidentally after I'd mentioned involving the authorities. Some had been opened and hastily resealed. The final gaming keyboard my late wife had planned as a surprise had mysterious sticky spots, as if someone had spilled coffee on it. A programming book she'd marked for me had fresh coffee stains across the pages. A small box containing a collectible figurine for my desk was missing entirely, though Karen insisted it had never been among the packages she temporarily secured for community aesthetic purposes. I decided to play the long game. First, I thoroughly read the HOA bylaws, all 127 mind-numbing pages. As I suspected, there was absolutely no mention of package regulations, delivery aesthetics, or the HOA president's authority to confiscate personal deliveries. However, I did find something interesting. The HOA board was required to keep detailed financial records available to any homeowner who requested them with 48 hours notice. I filed a form to review the HOA financial statements for the past year. Karen responded with a series of increasingly creative delays. The treasurer was on vacation. Documents were being professionally audited. The HOA office had experienced a localized water event affecting only the filing cabinet containing financial records. Meanwhile, I set up an additional camera that had a clear view of Karen's front porch. What I saw was illuminating. The packages she confiscated for violating imaginary aesthetic guidelines were making their way into her home, but very few ever came back out. Either Karen was hoarding an impressive collection of empty Amazon boxes, or she was keeping the contents for herself. I then attended the next HOA meeting, where I listened to Karen drone on about improper mailbox heights and unauthorized garden gnomes for nearly 2 hours. When the new business portion arrived, I calmly raised my hand. "I'd like to discuss the package confiscation policy that's apparently being enforced," I stated clearly. "I can't seem to find it in our bylaws." The other board members looked confused. Karen's face turned an impressive shade of crimson. "Well, it's more of an unwritten rule," she stammered, "for community." Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I sensed I wasn't the only victim of Karen's package surveillance program. "In that case," I continued, "I move that we create an official policy stating that HOA officials may not remove, inspect, or confiscate packages from private residences without explicit written permission from the homeowner." The motion was seconded and passed almost unanimously. Only Karen and her husband voted against it. Before adjourning my hand again, "One more item," I'd like to formally request access to the HOA financial records as permitted in Section 31-2 of our bylaws. I've submitted the request in writing 3 times over the past month, but haven't received a response. Karen's expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching panic. The records are still being organized. We've switched accounting systems recently, and there's been some confusion with the I understand, I replied pleasantly. However, the bylaws specify a 48-hour response window. I'd be happy to help with the organization if that would expedite the process. The meeting ended with Karen promising to have the records available very soon, and with several other homeowners suddenly expressing interest in reviewing the financial statements as well. I left the meeting feeling victorious, nodding politely to Karen on my way out. Karen looked over at my white shirt. I mentioned casually, "Oh, and I've installed some additional security cameras around my property just for aesthetic purposes, of course." My triumph was short-lived. The very next day, a delivery arrived while I was on a video conference. Through my office window, I watched Karen march up to my porch, glance around furtively, and take the package. My doorbell camera captured her muttering, "Best for this community. Someone has to maintain standards." This was the final straw. She was now knowingly violating a policy that had been created specifically because of her behavior. I decided it was time for a more creative approach to the Karen problem. I ordered several more packages over the next week, all of which mysteriously disappeared from my porch. Each theft was meticulously recorded on my camera. I also printed official-looking labels from various high-end electronics companies and attached them to empty boxes that I placed conspicuously on my porch. Karen took those too, her expression growing greedier with each valuable package she snatched. With each theft, I filed a police report online, building a case that was becoming impossible to ignore. Officer Reynolds called me after the 5th report. "This is getting ridiculous," he admitted. "We might have enough now to pursue charges, but honestly, these cases can get complicated with HOA involvement." "Do you have a lawyer?" I did indeed. Julia, who specializes in property law and has a particular distaste for overreaching homeowners associations, reviewed my evidence and drafted a strongly worded letter to both Karen and the HOA board. The letter outlined the multiple violations of property rights, potential mail theft charges, and the growing liability the association was facing by allowing its president to engage in what was almost certainly criminal behavior. The letter had an immediate effect. The board called an emergency meeting, which I attended with Julia. Karen was pale and defensive, insisting that she had been acting in the community's best interest and that my excessive deliveries were lowering property values somehow. When Julia presented the board with footage of Karen opening packages and pocketing the contents, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. But I wasn't done yet. I put the final phase of my plan into action. I contacted my cousin who works at a wildlife rehabilitation center. She occasionally deals with rescued skunks and has access to skunk scent, which they use for training programs. She was all too happy to help after hearing about my ongoing battle with the neighborhood tyrant. "This stuff is potent," me as she handed over a small, tightly sealed container. "Even this tiny amount can clear a room in seconds. Are you absolutely sure about this?" Truthfully, I wondered if I'd gone too far, but some lines can't be uncrossed. After all the pain Karen caused, I was ready to serve her a dose of her own medicine, skunk style. I carefully prepared a special package, a box from an expensive tech retailer containing nothing but a small plastic container with tiny holes in the lid. Inside was a cotton ball lightly doused with skunk essence. The container was designed not to leak or smell until opened. I added a pressure-sensitive trigger that would release the lid when the box was opened, and made sure everything was legal and wouldn't cause actual harm, just extreme discomfort. I also included a printed note that read, "This package has been reported stolen from the front porch of 1742 Oakwood Drive. Its contents have been recorded by security cameras and reported to the authorities. Attempting to open or retain this package constitutes acknowledgement of theft." For good measure, I added a sheet of paper with the relevant statutes regarding mail theft and the penalties associated with it. I then sealed the package, affixed a delivery label from a premium electronics company, and placed it prominently on my porch on a Tuesday afternoon. I chose Tuesday specifically because I knew Karen had her weekly neighborhood beautification committee meeting at her house that evening. According to the HOA newsletter, 6 other members would be gathering to discuss the critical issue of acceptable garden gnome attire. I placed the package knowing that Karen typically made her rounds after the regular delivery trucks had finished their routes. Then I waited, camera recording as I worked by the window. Sure enough, at 4:37 p.m., Karen Power walked up my driveway, snatched the package, and hurried back to her house. I continued working, occasionally glancing at her house, waiting for the inevitable. 23 minutes later, I heard it, a shriek that could have shattered windows, followed by what sounded like furniture being knocked over. Karen's front door flew open, and she stumbled out onto her lawn, gagging dramatically. Her hands were covered in what looked like rubber gloves, holding the now open box as far from her body as possible. Her husband rushed out behind her, covering his nose and mouth with his shirt. The beautification committee members followed in a chaotic procession, some coughing, others holding decorative throw pillows over their faces in a futile attempt to block the overwhelming odor. Karen's perfectly highlighted hair was disheveled, her eyes watering profusely, and her designer outfit now spotted with what I assumed was whatever cleaning solution she'd frantically grabbed first. "Oh my God, she screamed. "Someone call 911. I've been assaulted." Neighbors emerged from their homes, curious about the commotion. Mrs. Abernathy, the retired chemistry teacher from down the street, approached cautiously and took a tentative sniff. "That's not chemicals, dear," she announced loudly. "It's skunk spray. What on earth were you doing with a skunk?" "I wasn't doing anything with a skunk," Karen wailed. "It was in a package that she trailed off, suddenly aware of the crowd that had gathered and the implication of her words. "A package that you what, Karen?" I asked innocently, joining the growing audience on her lawn. "A package that you took from my porch, perhaps? The one addressed to me that was delivered about half an hour ago?" Karen's face contorted in fury. "You did this on purpose. You've been trying to undermine my authority from day one." "I simply received a package," I replied calmly. "I haven't even opened it yet. In fact, I've been missing quite a few packages lately. How strange that this one ended up in your house." When the police and a hazmat team arrived, yes, she actually convinced emergency services that she'd been the victim of a chemical attack. They quickly determined it was just skunk essence, powerful, offensive, but ultimately harmless. The officer asked how she had come into possession of the package. I emerged from hand, video queued up. "Officers, I believe I can help explain the situation." Officer Reynolds was among the responding officers and couldn't quite hide his smile as I showed him and his colleagues the footage of Karen taking the package. "Ma'am, did you open a package that was clearly addressed to someone else?" he asked Karen, who was still holding the offensive box at arm's length. "I was conducting a security inspection," she insisted. "As HOA president, it's my responsibility to—" "It's stealing other people's mail," interrupted Mrs. Berry. "That's what it looks like to me, and I've been watching you take packages from at least 3 different houses over the past month." Other neighbors began to voice their suspicions and experiences. The single mom mentioned missing birthday presents for her daughter. The elderly couple recalled a missing medication delivery. One by one, residents came forward with similar stories. As if the situation couldn't get worse for Karen, a county official who had been called to the scene due to hazmat concerns recognized her from his office. "Wilkins, don't you work in the county assessor's office?" Karen's face, already flushed from the skunk smell, turned even redder. "Yes, I'm the assistant deputy assessor for residential property." The county official looked troubled. "I think we need to have a conversation about this at the office tomorrow. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on county employees." While Karen argued with the officials, I noticed her husband slipping back into their house. He emerged moments later with several boxes and packages, still sealed, which he discreetly placed in their recycling bin. Officer Reynolds noticed too, and went to investigate. The horde of stolen packages was damning. Reynolds began cataloging them, matching addresses with various neighbors who were still gathered on the lawn. "Ma'am, at this point that you're facing multiple counts of mail theft, which is a federal offense." Karen's indignation melted into panic. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was going to return everything. I'm just looking out for the neighborhood." The next day I received a formal letter from the HOA board, informing me that Karen had been immediately removed from her position as president following an emergency meeting. The letter included a sincere apology from the board and a request that I not press charges for the multiple documented thefts, as the HOA would ensure Karen made financial restitution for all stolen or damaged items. Karen stood on her driveway, watching as the temporary HOA board president posted the announcement of her removal on the community bulletin board. Her face cycled through expressions of disbelief, rage, and finally, defeat. Even from across the street, I could hear her indignant voice cracking as she shouted, "This is completely unacceptable. Don't you people understand everything I've done for this community? I've dedicated years to maintaining our property values. I single-handedly prevented the installation of that hideous basketball hoop at the Johnsons' house. I can still smell that horrible stench in my house. My designer clothes are ruined. My career might be over. I'll sue every single one of you for defamation and emotional distress. No one was listening. The neighbors had already turned away, some exchanging phone numbers to organize the first truly democratic HOA election in Oakwood Estates history. Others were discussing a community barbecue to celebrate what they were calling Liberation Day. As for me, I simply watched from my porch, sipping coffee from a mug that deliberately violated Section 22-7 of Karen's imaginary updated bylaws. No beverage containers exceeding 8 ounces may be visible from the street. The final blow came when a police cruiser pulled into Karen's driveway. Officer Reynolds approached her with a clipboard in hand, a delicious parallel to how she had approached me on my first day in the neighborhood. Karen Wilkins, I'm here to formally charge you with multiple counts of mail theft, which, as I mentioned yesterday, is a federal offense. Please put your hands behind your back. As the handcuffs clicked into place and Karen's face morphed into an expression of pure disbelief, I couldn't help but think that in her obsessive quest to control every aspect of our neighborhood, she had finally received a package she couldn't return: consequences.